Linda Burney is the Shadow Minister for Families, Social Services and Indigenous Australians and joins me this afternoon. Linda Burney, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Patricia.
Look, the Prime Minister has given a speech and made some indications. He says people might need to move to jobs in regional Australia. If there is a job available and you are able to do that job, then it's reasonable for taxpayers to expect that it will be taken up. Do you think that's reasonable if the government moves to that sort of approach?
If only it were that easy, Patricia, but it's not. The government's been very successful at spinning the narrative that somehow or other people on JobSeeker are getting paid so much that they won't take jobs in regional Australia. But think about it, if you've got accommodation in Melbourne or Sydney or Newcastle or Geelong, why would you give that up to move to regional Australia for 6 weeks and then come back and try and get back into a very difficult rental market? That's just one very, very practical reason that it makes it very difficult for people to take these jobs. I think, though, with the JobSeeker legislation that's being introduced on Monday into the Parliament, there is a real issue. It doesn't require legislation. It can be done by regulation about the mutual obligation requirements that will be part of the way forward in terms of JobSeeker. And part of that is giving employers the capacity to job in somebody that won't take a job. Now, I just don't think that's the sort of incentive that we need. I believe in mutual obligation. It's really important, but it has to be reasonable and not punitive.
So what sort of steps is Labor going to take to try to resist any moves to try and make mutual obligation potentially more draconian?
So the legislation, Patricia, that's being introduced on Monday goes to the additional $50 a fortnight in JobSeeker, and it goes to the income-free threshold, but it doesn't address the issues of mutual obligation. They can be done by regulation by the Minister. We'll be moving a series of amendments and we'll just see where that goes.
Okay, you'll be moving amendments, but ultimately are you prepared to vote against the legislation?
No, we're going to support the increase. I know that there's been an inquiry today into JobSeeker, but Labor's taken the position, which I think is the right position, is that we will support the increase, be it $50 a fortnight. And obviously that legislation has to get through next week. Otherwise, everyone on JobSeeker will go back to the original New Start rate. So there is an imperative to get this done next week.
The Coalition has announced it's extending its apprentice wage subsidy program. I think it's going to cost over $1 billion. Does Labor welcome that?
We do welcome that. I mean, obviously, TAFE in particular and apprenticeships have been enormously reduced whilst this government's been in power. And at the state level, particularly here in New South Wales, I'm aware of. It's happened in other states too, Patricia. TAFE has been absolutely decimated, and Labor is committed to rebuilding TAFE as a very important part of going forward.
Just moving on to some other issues still in your portfolio. The Victorian government has announced a new commission to be modelled essentially on that panel set up by Nelson Mandela in post-apartheid South Africa. I think New Zealand, Canada have done something similar. It will host public hearings about social, economic and health disadvantage as a result of colonisation. Do you welcome this?
I am so excited by this announcement. I know Daniel Andrews, and I wish him well, is not feeling the best today, but his government needs a massive congratulations for taking this step. You and I have spoken over the last year and a half, 2 years, about the Uluru Statement and the fact that the Andrews government is using the announcement of this Truth and Justice Commission to help pave the way to treaty in Victoria is really important and really exciting. We all know how important truth is, and truth for me is a real liberator. And I think if there could be a national process of truth telling, which Labor backs in, of course, because part of the Uluru Statement, and it's also something that we as a nation really, really need. It's not about apportioning blame. It's not about any of that. It's about everyone in this country having a solid background in the truth of what happened in Australia over the last 230 odd years.
It's a 3-year process. Of course, the effects of colonisation continue. There's no debate about that. But some of these atrocities, of course, which we know, the frontier wars, stolen generation, some of these very direct policies or impacts, many of these elders are now, of course, dead and won't be able to provide evidence. What does it look like? It is different to post-apartheid South Africa, of course, where there are many people still alive to tell these stories. What does this look like?
Well, there are still many people alive that can talk about the sorts of things that you've spoken about. There are many people alive that are still members of the stolen generation. But, you know, Aboriginal story is an oral tradition, and those traditions and stories have been handed down through generations. So I think that what the Andrews government has announced today with this Truth and Justice Commission for Victoria is going to serve Victoria well for a very, very long time.
Should we be prepared to hear some horrific stories?
Well, there will be horrific stories. There's no two ways about that. And I remember myself going to the Northern Territory several years ago and meeting the son of someone whose dad was in one of the massacres in the 1920s in Northern Territory. So people should be prepared, but people should have an open heart and an open mind and understand that this is for the whole community. It's not just for First Nations people.
And how much will this provide a potential model for a national commission that does similar kind of work?
I think it will provide a very important model. There are a number of models across the country where, particularly in the ACT, where there is a voice to the ACT Parliament. But having a commission that is so brave and so honest, it will pave the way treaty might look like. It won't be the exact model that would apply nationally, but really, Patricia, when we think about treaties, we shouldn't just think of one treaty, we should think about many treaties.
Of course, so many nations in this country, not at all a homogenous group of people, as you know better than anyone, but that is a key part, of course, of history and contemporary experience too. Look, before I let you go, of course, just on some other Canberra issues, Scott Morrison has revealed that he didn't seek legal advice from the government's most senior independent lawyer, like the Solicitor General, before he rejected calls for an independent inquiry into sexual assault allegation against Christian Porter. Should he have?
Yes, Labor is calling for an independent inquiry, as you would be aware. I mean, first of all, Christian Porter, and I wish him well in his recovery, is the highest law officer in the country. That position has to be beyond reproach. The New South Wales Police said there's not enough admissible evidence. The South Australian coroner's yet to make up their mind. But that should not preclude Scott Morrison taking responsibility and calling an independent inquiry into this matter.
Just finally, before I let you go, a story that's coming out of New South Wales. Hopefully you know something about it, but if you don't, I'll walk you through it because it seems quite significant to me. 2 Indigenous people died in custody in New South Wales last week, but their deaths were not reported publicly until a bureaucrat, I think, was questioned during a parliamentary budget estimates hearing today. That's according to AAP. They've reported this. Are you disappointed, surprised, alarmed by this?
I have to say, Patricia, I am alarmed. I was made aware of this story and I've read the AAP report. Imagine if that person wasn't questioned at budget estimates. And what it really brings to my mind is how many of these deaths in custody go unreported. Now, the reasons that the Commissioner has said is he didn't want to cause alarm or feed into people being upset. That is not a reason not to be open and public about deaths in custody. There is no reason whatsoever.
Linda Burney, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Patricia.